There are many aspects of any religious icon that should be questioned. Muhammad's life and his teachings are due criticism as well. I mean, we discuss everyone else from Jesus, Buddha, and everyone in between, right? So why not evaluate Muhammad? Today we're discussing the Islamic State. We know that the Islamic terror network is infamous for its killing tactics, its evil doings. Now, the Western mindset, really, it's hard for us to accept what they do as modern. I mean, we don't accept their leadership as legitimate. And oftentimes in the West, many people assume that ISIS is a bunch of rogue thugs seeking power and wreaking havoc. But my question today is this: is Islam, as practiced by ISIS, a religion of violence that encourages the maiming and the murder of those who refuse to accept it? ISIS themselves have enforced cruelty upon the Iraqis and the Syrians, so they really believe in what they're doing, and they attribute it to Islam. To answer our question today, the search for correlations between ISIS tactics and the early Islamic era of Muhammad, it continues. Because for me, when I compare the two eras, I can't help but to see things that need to be discussed. For example, Muhammad approving the death of a girl named Asma bint Marwan. This story is particularly disturbing because she was killed while breastfeeding her child. Asma was a poetess from the city of Medina, and she opposed Muhammad with her poetry. So when Muhammad realized what she was reciting or saying in her poetry, he's quoted as saying, "Who will rid me of this daughter of Marwan?" So a devout follower of Muhammad enters Asma's house in the night, 5 children around her, including the one she was breastfeeding. This man takes the baby away and stabs Asma in her heart. Now, when Muhammad was told what his follower had did, this was his response. He says, "No 2 goats will lock heads over her." Now, in modern day, that's like saying, who in the world cares? So in 1400 years of history, maybe Asma seems to have died in vain, not remembered, maybe even looked down upon by some people. But today I consider her a hero of free speech. She was clearly living before her time. Another story that shows some correlation between ISIS tactics and Islam is the story of Kurfa. Kurfa's story is incredible. It's horrifying. This incident occurred about 6 years after Muhammad moved to Medina. So there was a tribe called Banu Fazara. When Banu Fazara were attacked by Muhammad and his warriors, the tribe concocted a plan to retaliate or to kill Muhammad, but they were overpowered by the Muslims. So a mother named Kurfa and her daughter escaped the raids, and they escaped the raids narrowly, but they soon became prisoners. And upon their capture, the mother was handed to one of Muhammad's followers named Qais. Qais takes the woman and tied her limbs to camels, and then beat the camels, whipped them so that the camels could charge opposite directions, literally tearing Kurfa apart limb by limb. What happened to her daughter? Her daughter was now orphaned, then sold into slavery. The oldest, most reliable historian on the life of Muhammad explains that the attack was led by Zayd bin Haritha. So then Zayd then orders Qais to execute Kurfa. And what's interesting is Ibn Ishaq, on his biography of Muhammad, page 980 of the life of Muhammad, says that she was, quote, cruelly killed. So if we follow the trail, we see that this whole tragedy, at the root of it, was initiated and inspired by Muhammad. So the question that I come to now is this: what is jihad? Is jihad as we've been told in the West, or is jihad as we've been told in the Middle East? Here's the difference. In the West, we're told that jihad is this working on your inner self, getting rid of the carnal nature of you, getting rid of selfishness and the struggle you have with your own self. But in the Middle East, they teach jihad completely different. They teach that it's a conquest of war for the sake of Islam, fighting in the cause of Allah, much like we would understand it like the Crusaders. Was it an inward struggle, or, according to Muhammad, was it an outward struggle with arms? So that's the question. So today we have to discuss ISIS. Have they taken jihad out of context, or are they doing jihad as ordained by Muhammad? So as we've said before and we discussed, the best way to know Muhammad's views, or any religious icon really, is to review their book and their quotes. So what did Muhammad say on the issue of jihad? How do we know if ISIS has taken jihad out of context, from the inward struggle to the outward struggle of conflict and aggression? I'll tell you what we do know. Muhammad is on record saying, within the narrations, his quotations, credible Islamic sources, he's quoted as saying, "He who dies without participating in jihad or conquest," now get this, "or wishing for it, that person will be in the same status as a hypocrite." Now, what does that mean? That means if you don't fight in jihad, in conquest, the outward struggle to enforce Islam in the earth, that's okay, but you don't have the choice whether to want to or not. That's basically what that hadith says. So we have imams all over the world literally recite these hadith, and then we wonder why ISIS is so out of control. When these narrations are regularly quoted in Friday sermons, I've heard them, I've been there, I just turn the channel on, you will hear them. The only outcome is the radicalization of good, kind-hearted people who are wanting to seek and please their God, to please Allah. It's also on record saying that Muhammad has said, "I have been commanded," and it's even in the Quran, by the way, "I have been commanded," not suggested, not inspired, not led, "I have been commanded to fight people until they testify that there is no God but Allah and that He Himself is the messenger." And this takes it a little further, not just to confess Allah and Muhammad. You have to perform your prayers, pay jizya. What is the jizya tax? It's not even a tax, it's a fine actually. The jizya is when people are conquered by Muslim raiding armies. You have, if you're a Jew or a Christian, you have the option to opt out of becoming Muslim, but you have to pay for it. So basically, it's a discrimination fine for being a non-Muslim. If we enforce that in America today, all hell would break loose. So what's interesting too is that Muhammad said in that same quote, he said, if you do this, if you repent and you become a Muslim, and if you don't become a Muslim, you pay the fine, you will be protected, your possessions will be protected from the enemy or from Satan or from hell. No, that's not what he said. He said, you will be protected from me. Why do you need to be protected from Muhammad if he was a peaceful, loving man? That's interesting to note. The teaching also finds its root in the Quran. The only way for non-Muslims to spare their lives is to pay that jizya. So ISIS actions are a direct obedience, it's a direct correlation to these hadiths and verses like this in the Quran. 9:5 says, fight them, slay the pagans wherever you find them, seize them, beleaguer them, and lay in wait for them in every stratagem of war, every strategy of war. So who were these pagans? Some translations say polytheists or infidels. So who were the infidels? Modern Western Muslim apologists will make the claim that these pagans were contemporaries of Muhammad. It's not for modern day. These were 7th century enemies who were trying to attack and persecute the Muslims. Why? Because self-defense is almost always justified. So if we sweep this back to the 7th century and assume they were in self-defense, then it's okay. But this verse is not that. It's not that. 9:5 is specific to those who had no belief, but a further reading within the same chapter clearly declares war against Christians and Jews. So now we're not back in the 7th century, we're back in modern day. Jews and Christians labeled as infidels. You have to pay the discrimination fee. 9:29 of the Quran says this, fight against those who do not believe in Allah, basically any non-Muslim, fight those who don't believe in the Day of Judgment, fight those who do not believe, who do not follow the Sharia of Muhammad, and those who acknowledge not the religion of truth. Basically, it leaves the door narrow for people to go in and out of. You have got to pretty much convert to Islam in order to not be fought against by, according to that verse. So, to read these verses from the Quran and ignore the similarities between Muhammad and ISIS would be such a disservice to anyone seeking the historical truth. Proof of this is my own traveling to Iraq. I met many Yazidis, so-called infidels, who were not even given the option to pay the subjugation fine. Why? Because they weren't Christian or Jew. What they were was infidels. So only the Christians of Mosul, for example, were given the option. And many people don't even have the money to pay the fee. So these verses predate ISIS. So one can conclude that these actions by ISIS stem directly from the early era of Islam. And it's not a misinterpretation or a hijacking of true Islam. Stick around, because just when you thought it was getting serious, here comes the next video. So be looking for it and join the conversation online using this hashtag.